welcome to PodRocket, a web development podcast brought to you by LogRocket. I'm Noel, and today we have Barry Pollard, Chrome DevRel, here to talk about speculations on web performance. How's it going, Barry?
Hey, how's it going? Good.
Good. Can we kind of just talk about the speculation rules API, how this works, the history of this, what problem we're really solving here?
I work on the Chrome DevRel team in the web performance area, and the speculation rules API is an API that we've been working on for the last few years, which helps improve performance in a kind of different way, because there's two ways to improve performance. One is just make everything faster, which is the most obvious way, but can be quite tricky. And the alternative is to basically cheat and start doing things earlier. And that's what the speculation part of it means. So there's a long history in the web of prefetching or preloading content before the user actually needs it, in the hope that they will use it whenever they click on a link. If you've already got that link's contents, then you can show it a lot faster. So even if the page is still slow, the fact that you've moved that starting point earlier means it appears faster to the user.
What kind of prefetching has been done historically in a standards-driven way? Is there much that the browsers have been doing? Is there anything that like web apps or web pages themselves could have been informing or instructing the browsers to do?
Yeah, so there's been resource hints, including LinkRel prefetch. So you can put that on a page and say, hey, I'm going to want this at some point in the future. Go ahead and fetch it. There's lots of similar ones. There's LinkRel preload, which basically means I'm going to want it at some point in the future, but for this page. So it's kind of preloading for this page. Prefetch is more, I'm going to want it for a future page. It's not a priority. You've got better things to do for this page, then go ahead and do it. And then there's just regular API calls to fetch things. The most obvious one being called fetch. So you can make a JavaScript API call and make that. In the olden days, there was XHR requests and that sort of things. So particularly JavaScript frameworks and the like will often use fetch to fetch content in advance before they do it, particularly if they're in an SPA type thing. So this if you're hovering over a link that probably shows that you're interested in it, you're probably going to click on it. Let's go ahead and fetch it. Yeah, so there's been various sorts of technologies that have done this in the past. Ruby on Rails did this with a library called TurboLinks, which didn't just do this, but I think in the third or fourth version they added that. QuickLink was a library by Adi Osmani and the Google Chrome team and a few others. Instant.page was another library. So there's been a few libraries that do this. And then, say JavaScript frameworks are famous for doing this as well, because particularly if they're SPA type based, then as you hover over a link, it will make the fetch call for the data it needs to render that link. A lot of this has been available in the past, but more from low-level APIs where we've given you the ability to fetch stuff, but it's up to you how you use that. Where the speculation rules API differs from that is it's making it much more declarative and letting you're giving rules to the browser and letting it go ahead and handle complexities of when and how to fetch these sorts of things.
Which feels a little bit more akin to the first couple examples that you can put on like in the HTML on the links explicitly saying like, here browser, here's how you might know what media or what pages I might want to fetch next. Was there a particular need that the groups working on this felt like the libraries and these tools were coming up short on, or is this really just like a way to make this more standardized across browsers, make things like work on web and mobile and kind of make that more of a interactive experience between the browser and the developer to kind of be more explicit about how this stuff happens without needing to rely on some huge library?
No, I think the main thing was, like I say, a lot of this are built into SPA JavaScript frameworks, but there was no real easy way, short of a third-party library, for doing this for non-SPA sites, MPA sites, or websites as we used to call them in the old days. Yeah. So if you've just got a multi-page app where you click on things, so BBC News website, for example, and as you click around it, you're loading documents from the start. Those are kind of, slow by nature, just the nature of the web, in that each document is loaded separately. You click on a link, it has to go to the server, get the HTML, render it separately and stuff like that. And that's kind of the problem that SPAs are trying to solve. And we can argue whether they have solved it or made it more complex. I think there's very good examples of SPAs and there's lots and lots of examples that are less good. But the fact that you have to go to that extreme to make it a seamless experience we saw as a feeling of the web platform and such, and something that we could do better. So if you want to use SPAs, that's grand. If you don't, then this is kind of an alternative to go there. And again, you can mimic that experience yourself by managing the prefetch, but there's quite a lot of things that you would need to do to take care of that. And there's a lot of things that you can't do unless the browser gets involved and builds this in as an API. So that was our starting point of how can we make this faster. And also from the browser, I think one of the first things that we did was the browser doing this. So if you've got your bookmarks bar at the top, whenever you hover over those, it will pre-render the page and you can click on it. So that's not so much the API, but it's the same technology behind it. Or if you're typing in www.go, and we know from your past browser history that you're 99% chance going to google.com, we can go ahead and pre-render that and just make a faster experience so we can make Chrome better. And once we had that, then we can expose it. We were able to expose it as an API to allow
Elizabeth
websites
here,
to do
producer
similar.
for PodRocket. Did you know that we have a weekly newsletter? The replay is curated for what dev leaders are reading, building, and debating right now. Check it out in our show notes.
What kind of information can be specified to the speculation rules API, and how do devs do so?
So at its heart, it's basically a JSON-based language where you put a rule. It's kind of difficult to explain it over sound, but the very basic rule is in a script tag of a special type called speculation rules. So it's not JavaScript in there. Within that, there's a JSON object, and you say whether you want to prefetch or pre-render. And I'll talk a little bit later about the differences between those and the trade-offs you should make with those. And then you can either list a list of URLs, which is very similar to the link rel prefetch, or you can actually have a where clause. So you can use that to target links on the page. So you can say all links, all same origin links, because this is primarily about prefetching links within your site as you navigate around. All links except ones with a special CSS class, or all links that don't have a slash unsafe URL or excluding slash logout. Or you can flip it around and say only links that are slash product or whatever. We know those ones are good ones to pre-render and stuff like that. So yeah, you can build up this kind of dynamic custom rule, and it can get really quite complicated if you want this as complicated as you need to be. But you can also use other APIs to help target this rule. I mentioned you could have a static list of URLs in there. You could inject that rule and take it and remove a rule as you see fit for whatever you're trying to do. Or if you're using the where clause, you could have a pre-render me class, and based on whatever heuristics you want, you could add that class to various links, and the browser will notice that and go ahead and prefetch and pre-render it. But what's more exciting is whenever you just let the browser do this. So within the rule, you can have one field is the eagerness field, and we have 4 settings in that, which is immediate. That just means, yeah, go ahead and
Keep going. Yeah.
as soon as you see this rule. You can have eager, I'll get back to that, moderate, and conservative. And at the minute, conservative is basically whenever you start clicking on the link. What you might not realize is whenever you click on a link, there's actually 2 parts to that. There's a mouse down action, and then about 120, 180 milliseconds later, you get a mouse up. And browsers navigate on that mouse up and it issues a click event at that point. So you've got 120, 180 milliseconds there in between where the browser, you've started clicking, there's a very high probability you're going to finish clicking it. It is possible to click, drag your mouse away and let go. And I'm sure we've all done that. I'm sure we've also done that 1 out of 1,000 times or something like that. The other 999 times we've gone ahead and clicked it fully. So it's rare enough. I think it's a very strong signal once you started clicking down that you're nearly always going to click it.
And then unless you're on some weird SPA and then like you expect it to be the mouse up event like always, but they've implemented something where it's the mouse down event that navigates you. It doesn't work and you get navigated anyway.
So we're not changing that, and we'll still go ahead and do that, and you can do what you like. But what might have happened is we might have started making that request in the background. And if that does anything weird, I could give the example of if it was a logout link, it might go ahead and log you out, then you stop. So there's a few things that you need to be aware of. It's not completely risk-free, but I think it's relatively safe for that sort of thing, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But yeah, so that you can have that. That's the conservative thing, and I say the Other end of the spectrum is immediate, which is just, hey, go ahead and speculate this link now. And that's when you know, as soon as the page loads, they're probably going to go to this next page. So if you are in a web development course and you're on step 3, reading about JavaScript, whatever, there's a very high chance you're going to go to step 4. So going ahead and speculating that might be a good cause. If you are CNN.com and you know that 50% of your users that go there click on the headline article, it might be good to speculate that or something like that. So those are ones where the user journey is kind of obvious and you know where they're going to go. There's obviously a bigger chance of wastage there or of people not clicking on it. So it's up to yourself to do that. And in between that, there's 2 stages, which is, one is kind of hover, and we make you hover for 200 milliseconds so that if you're just using your mouse and scanning over the page and using your mouse to read, we wouldn't hopefully speculate that. And then the eager one is recently changed, it's now 10 milliseconds over. So you've got 4 levels of things. But I mentioned earlier, this hover thing is quite a well-known pattern. You can now do this on your website by inserting 4 lines of JSON, just including that in your HTML, and you kind of automatically get that. And you'll have sped up your website. You don't need to rewrite the text. You don't need to do anything like this. It will just be faster. Again, assuming it's a full page app and not an SPI, they've got their own ways of dealing with this. So it's quite nice that you don't have to suddenly add a new library, a new dependency you've got to keep up to date or something like that. You just put a very simple rule in saying, all same origin links on moderate, go ahead and prefetch these, and then you've just suddenly got an instant speed gain.
So you mentioned it was like 200 milliseconds hover for moderate and 10 milliseconds for eager. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that part of the spec, or is that up to the browsers? Like, how well defined is this versus just like implementation options details that are up to the browsers themselves?
So they are implementation specific, so it's not in the spec. Browsers can implement it slightly differently as they see fit. So the browser might say 300 milliseconds, or I will, as long as you're hovering with a couple of centimeters of the link, will allow that. It doesn't have to be over the link. So there's a bit of leeway and freedom there within the browsers. At the minute, this is only available in Chrome, though an external developer recently added it to WebKit, which is the engine that powers Safari, behind a flag, but that's coming soon. And I know the Firefox team are working on it as well. It remains to be seen whether they copy the same. I imagine in a lot of cases they will. I think where they might differ slightly is we've also done some funky stuff on mobile. So on mobile, there is really no hover because there's no mouse. Technically, the hover event fires about 3 milliseconds before the click event, but you're not getting the gain there. We recently changed that to kind of, as you're scrolling the screen up and down, the link enters a viewport. If the link is near where you started scrolling and the scrolling stopped for 500 milliseconds, then it's near in the middle of the screen and it's probably a high chance there. So we've put those sorts of things in very recently. That's one of the new things I was talking about on this API. Maybe the other browsers don't have that initially and they fall back to the old ones, or maybe they can come up with better heuristics, whatever. In general, I think, although it's not spec'd, I wouldn't be surprised if other browsers, when they put it in, if they follow the same trends. We've done quite a bit of experimentation and research there, so we think these are good heuristics. I imagine by default they're kind of be easier to follow that and see how it goes, and maybe tweak it over time as they do their own experiments and maybe come up with better. But no, it's not technically spec.
It kind of makes sense because like you'd think there'll be different people that are using like screen readers or stuff like that. Like they're probably going to need entirely different heuristics to determine when a link should be preloaded. I appreciate the simplicity of the different layers being how long is the hover occurred, like is happening in the browser. And I understand how on mobile, it's harder to come up with good indicators that someone's about to click on a link. Was there ever an impulse, even for web, to kind of make that more complicated as well? Like try to figure out if the user has clicked on this link in the past, or like if their mouse is looking like it's headed towards this direction on a link, or wait until something is in the viewport. Like, did you guys kind of toss around anything that was more complicated that didn't end up panning out as a very good signal?
No, so I think on desktop, the hover is a very good signal. Most desktop users are using a mouse, and that's a strong one. So on mobile, it's less of a thing, so you can't really have it's going towards the link because there's no pointer, and if there was a pointer, then hover would be good enough and do that. On mobile, we did a lot of experiments with different ones about, should it be all links? I think we also exclude very small links, so the terms and condition links aren't pre-rendered because most people don't click on them and that sort of thing. So there's a number of things that we tried on looking at. And I think this is a general problem. There's on mobile, there's other things that we've been looking at in Chrome, just to diverge from speculation rules for a second. The interest target, interest evokers stuff, I don't know if you've heard about those, but we're having thoughts about those where on GitHub, if you hover over a username, you get a mini profile showing on hover. How can we do that on mobile? And one tactic that we see, or one pattern that we see a lot, is that people kind of holding down the link. You kind of get a little preview and that sort of thing. So I think this is a general thing of on mobile, certain things are more difficult, or certain patterns are emerging. I mean, other things are very easy. I'd say scrolling on mobile is a lot easier. You kind of more natural. You're just flicking, whereas going over to the scroll bar and scrolling up and down, even though we've had that for years in desktop, it's not quite as natural as just flicking the page up. So there's just very different mediums, and understanding how those work is interesting. But yeah, bringing it back there, I think the 4 levels are even by their names. So we didn't want the name to be hover or click, whatever. It's kind of immediate, eager, moderate, and conservative, to kind of give a suggestion of, these things are going to be either immediately or very conservative and therefore less gains, and we will still tweak and fiddle between what that means exactly. But the concept there is I'm very conservative, or I'm very optimistic and just want this to go as quick as possible.
Are there any potential unexpected consequences that developers might run into? I think the one that obviously speaks to mind is just like increased bandwidth usage, more busy network requests and stuff. But I really only think that would have a measurable impact if you're using immediate most of the time. Is there anything else that can catch you off guard as a developer when using these?
The main rules are so increased costs, whether that be server load, CDN costs because you're hitting those more, or even client costs. Like site runners probably think of myself, but you also need to think about your users. You don't really want to burden them with extra costs, particularly on mobile, where people might be on data plans and that sort of thing, and can be expensive. So that's about, I say, there's a balance between speculating earlier to get the more gains out of it, but also increasing the costs, or speculating very late when they've started clicking down. Exactly they're almost 99% sure going to be going there, but the gains are going to be very small at that stage, as say 120, 180 milliseconds is kind of there. So that's one thing. The other thing, as I alluded to earlier, is URLs that change things. So that's logout links or add to cart links and those sorts of things. Now, technically, by the HTTP specification, get links, which is the only ones we do, shouldn't do this. They should be, they're called safe, but there's a wide web out there, and people do all sorts of strange things. We discovered whenever we put this in on WordPress that WooCommerce, their e-commerce platform, actually adds add to cart on a link, or removes from cart. Weirdly, it was like an add to cart, it did it, and remove to cart, it didn't, or the other way around. I can't remember off the top of my head which way around it was. Why are you doing this? But anyway, but they had a link rel no follow on the link to stop followers doing this, but we came along with this new API. We had to say, okay, excluding anything with a no follow link, because that's probably quite a good idea not to do that. So yeah, you find all sorts of weird and wonderful people doing weird and wonderful things out there. So yeah, that's one to be aware of. And even if they don't break things, your analytics can fire off earlier, where you might not want to. This is particularly for pre-render. And probably now's a good time to talk about that. It's like prefetch just gets the HTML document and just fetches that, and then keeps it there ready for you to use. So if you click on it, you've saved a bit of time. And that's first up, until you get that document, you can't do anything. So you can't scan it. You don't know about what images to download or something like that. So getting that document is a critical part of loading a web page. So getting that earlier is good. So that's a less risky approach, is to just get the document. We can take it one step further. And this is something, again, that those older APIs that we started this conversation with couldn't do, is we can actually start to render this document. The way I put it is like, it's almost like right-clicking and opening a new tab, and it's in a tab there, and it's loading the page. Now, it's in a hidden background tab. You won't see it in the tab bar, but as soon as you click on that link, it kind of replaces the current page with that page that hopefully by this point is fully pre-rendered. And that can give like an instant loading experience, and that can be very good. But that is running all your JavaScript, doing all your things, maybe firing off page views when the page hasn't been viewed yet, maybe firing off ad views when nobody's seen those ads, and so on. So again, any sort of changes or analytics, firing those can be fun. Now, a lot of the analytics providers, particularly Google Analytics and GPT that fires our ad stuff, are pre-render aware and won't fire until you actually do click on it. But a lot of the other sort of third-party ones won't be yet because it's fairly new technology. So you need to be aware of that and what it does. Or one place to get this is if you're loading stuff with GTM or any other tag manager, or if you've got consent bots, sort of cooking consent bot. Some of them are pre-render aware. So if they can say, okay, we're going to hold a pause here until the page is actually done, that can stop lots of third parties getting in there. So even if the third parties aren't pre-rendered, they won't be loaded anyway. So that can be a good sort of gatekeeper to do it. And then the final thing to be aware of is stale content. So you load something, particularly you've got a basket, you prefetch it and you've got the basket in your HTML code because it's server-side rendered, or you pre-rendered the page. You then add another 3 things to your basket. You finally click on this link and it says you've got 2 things in your basket, not 5. So there's APIs there that are aware of this, that you can either keep it up to date, or on activation you can sit there and go, okay, let me double check what the current state of the basket is and update it. But it's something to be aware of. So I think for static pages, like your blogs or even news media websites, this is quite an easy API to implement. For more complex apps, or particularly e-commerce shops, it sometimes needs a little bit more thought.
So say like someone hovers over a link and you're on the moderate setting, so it prefetches, but then they don't click and they hover again. Does the prefetch occur again, or is the browser keeping track of what's already been loaded and it's like just not doing it, or is it using the built-in cache layer that's already there? What does actually happens?
All of the above. So for that hover thing, we allow 2 speculations to happen at once. So if you hover over link 1, we'll prefetch it. You hover over link 2, we'll prefetch it. You hover over link 3, we will discard link 1.
Oh, interesting.
Prefetch that. But if you then re-hover over link 1, we'll now discard link 2 is the oldest now. So we'll have link 1 and link 3 ready to go. Now, if that document was cacheable based on cache control HTTP headers, we'll have saved it in HTTP cache. Whenever you hover over it again, we'll just fetch it from the cache and have it ready to go. So it follows the standard cache heuristics, but it also has some extra stuff in that even if it's not cacheable, it will keep it there. Because I say the easy thing to think about is like right-click, open a new tab.
Yeah.
In that case, even if it wasn't cacheable, it would still be there. And if you click on it, if it's you're looking at stock prices, they could be a couple of seconds or minutes out of date, depending when you looked at it. So it's the same with this, is it can be out of date there, but we will try our best not to refetch it if it's in date, and if you've told us, hey, this is good for half an hour, 3 hours, 2 days, whatever, then we'll just be able to fetch it from that HTTP cache and just use it there.
The other thing I wanted to circle back on from your list there is you mentioned the existing rel attribute and interactions and behaviors there, and trying to use that to glean what should happen with speculations API. There used to be a pre-render for rel, didn't there? Am I misremembering that?
That's correct. That was another Chrome-only API. It was non-standard, a little bit funky, didn't really take off. We didn't get a lot of interest from the other browsers or the standardization committee. So we actually took that away. That it still exists, but we took away the pre-rendering functionality for a lot of the reasons that we're talking about here, where things were breaking or whatever, and we didn't have good APIs for people to deal with it. So we actually changed that from pre-rendering to, we called it no-state prefetch, which is a horribly complicated sounding name. To basically say, fetch the document, fetch anything that you see in it, your images, your tags, your JavaScript, but don't execute everything. So it's fetching document and sub-resources, but not rendering, not executing JavaScript and stuff like that. So that's where that lies at the minute. Where, as I say, it wasn't available on any other browser. The uptake of it was very, very low. And we're thinking we actually call this pre-render V2 internally, because this is that done right, in effect. We've taken the learnings of that, figured it out, done a lot more standard work on it, added more APIs, figured out what's the reasons why that failed, and we're now looking there. And as I say, already we've got widespread usage of this API. We can talk about some of the people using it already, and also interest from the other browsers, which we didn't get with that other one. So yeah, it's that done right with a little bit more thought and a little bit more ability with this sort of hover ability and that sort of thing, and a little bit more thinking about what to do whenever it doesn't work, and other ways that you can detect, hey, am I pre-rendering at the moment, or am I a pre-rendered page that's become activated? Do I need to double check my state and make sure that everything's up to date? Or can I cancel these whenever I want to with various APIs and that sort of thing?
When you guys set out, if you initially were trying to kind of use the existing attributes, or were you thinking about like maybe just adding more inline attributes kind of in the same way here versus this new JSON powered API, or was there a particular problem that you saw with like the semantics of the rel attribute that actually were problematic that you think is solved by having this JSON specification instead?
Yeah, I think the link rel attribute is fine if you just want to list individual URLs. But I think from the early on, we wanted to be able to have more of a rule of matching URLs in the current page. And at that point, that would make that, it's not impossible, but it would make it quite complicated, or you'd end up effectively taking a JSON-like language and stringifying it and sticking it on an attribute. At which point, why not just admit that this is effectively JSON or whatever language, specific language you want to do, and do that. Saying that, whenever we did get standardization, that's a lot of the feedback we got, that particularly from other browser vendors, and we have this tag committee that we go to and stuff like that, and they were asking, hey, they were not happy with this sort of JSON-based language, saying this seems weird, it's something we're adding to the platform. Platform is typically HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and now you're doing that. There is some precedent there. We have import maps, which is JSON-based, and there's a few other things on the platform that do this. But yeah, a lot of the standard people were a little worried about that and questioning it. Saying that, all the web developers were quite happy about it, because it's quite easy to grok, it's quite easy to understand, it's quite easy to format and stuff like that. And we never got any problems at all from the developers. It was mostly the web standards people who were questioning it and stuff like that. We weren't particularly wanting to go back to that link rel syntax. We thought it would just get very complicated very quickly and quite difficult to read. So we stuck to our guns there, despite the feedback, and said, no, we're going to stick with this. And I think we've made them come round, because they've realised, okay, this turns out it doesn't seem to have been a problem. You've got widespread adoption. Fair enough. We will agree to disagree, and we've got no problem to implement that now that we've actually seen it in practice. I mean, a lot of this sort of stuff, we're trying to guess what's going to happen in the future as this goes on there. Will it get adopted? Will people find it confusing? Will people get it and stuff like that? And sometimes nobody can see the future, and sometimes well-intentioned ways they'll say, are you sure about this? And we'll say, oh, reasonably, but it could have been gone the other way and we could have been wrong, but we were reasonably confident, and we'd some early partners who had looked at it at that point and seemed happy with it. So yes, it was something that was looked at, and from our side, not a huge amount, because we weren't convinced that was the right. We were convinced it was the wrong way to go. But certainly, we got some feedback on that.
You mentioned that with the rel pre-render, there were problems because like people were not expecting like trackers and whatever, add like internal things when a page was loaded, state changes occurring. Do you think that is still going to be as much of a problem here? Because I wouldn't. This doesn't really feel like that is going to be that different. Like, do you think that it's less unexpected and that's kind of why we're seeing uptick, or what's the like? Why do you think that won't be as problematic as we're going down this path?
I think it is problematic, and one of the other new things I'll talk about to avoid that. But what you couldn't do in the old way was detect that and say, hey, I'm a script, I don't want this to run, hold off until activation.
I do want to get into like performance and the metrics and stuff that you guys are seeing and how you're gathering telemetry and how you've seen usage and everything. But before we get there, I'm curious, you mentioned with rel that there was a lot of kind of problems with adoption, and not in it being adopted, but implementation problems wherein pre-rendering a page would cause weird like side effects that people weren't using, so that didn't end up happening. Are we going to end up kind of trotting that same path here, or is there something in particular about this API that you think will prevent that foot gun from being so detrimental?
Yeah, I think that's still very much a risk. I think what we've done differently with this API is we've given additional APIs for people to detect that. So you can sit there and say, hey, am I in pre-rendering mode? If so, don't fire off an analytics thing. Or, fire it off whenever the page comes active or anything like that. That didn't exist with the previous implementation before. It was very basic in some terms of just pre-render all or nothing. Now that still means that the people running the JavaScript, whether that's you or your website or third parties using it, still need to actually use these APIs we've given them, but at least that's an option now. And as I say, we're seeing that with a lot of API owners. So Google Analytics, for example, does that. GPT, which Google Publisher Tag, which handles ads, the prebid.js library that handles a lot of ads, they are all pre-render aware and can hold back their content and their breaking changes or beaconing or whatever until it actually happens. So that as a concept didn't exist before. The other thing was it was literally a tag saying pre-render this page. Now with these heuristics that I'm talking about, we can do it in hover and stuff like that. You can do it later whenever there's a higher chance of intent. That still might cause you problems if people don't go there, but there's less of a chance there. Now, you could have done that in the past with your own heuristics and then inserting that tag and taking it away and stuff like that. Whereas here it's built in, people can do that more. So, yes, still a problem, and yes, some things to still be aware of, but at least now there's things you can do about it. Saying that, we're actually just at the minute trialing a third option. So we have prefetch, which just gets the HTML document, pre-render, which gets the HTML document, all the sub-resources, and actually renders the page. What we're just introducing now, it's available behind a flag, and we're going to go to Origin trial in January, is a mode we call pre-render until script. This is very similar to what LinkRel pre-render was turned into to try and make it safer, which was get the document and get all the sub-resources. But we're taking it one step further, is that we will start rendering the page and going through it, and only when we hit the script will we pause. You're one of 3 pages on the entire internet that doesn't use JavaScript. It will pre-render it in total. If all your JavaScript is at the bottom of your page, it will basically pre-render the whole page and then run the JavaScript and do that. The more common scenario is you've got some JavaScript in your head. In that case, it will pause when it sees those. It will still carry on. Preload scanner will just still find all the other resources and download those. So you'll still get a lot more benefit than just prefetch. But you will get a lot safer than doing a full pre-render. Because, we discovered that a lot of the partners, pre-render is what we really wanted. You can get that real instant navigation. But we discovered a lot of partners and a lot of people were quite scared to do that until they audited their website and understood every JavaScript that runs on it and all the third parties that run on it. It was just quite a big ask. So we saw a lot of people stuck at prefetch, and we wanted to make sure that they could very easily go beyond that, or fairly easily go beyond that, even if they didn't get to the pre-render. I mean, ultimately, we'd still love people to get there. But I think the pre-render until script gives a lot more benefits than prefetch. Not quite the full benefits of pre-render, but a lot closer to that for a lot of basically same risks as prefetch. You're getting nearly the benefits of pre-render, but nearly the low risk of prefetch, and it's a good middle ground.
Yeah. The full pre-render does feel like it'd be these big sites would want to be doing full regression tests and everything. Scared they're going to break specific cases and show some link that, you're right, that logs out on a GET request or something like that.
Yeah, as this becomes more and more common, and it's really quite common, we think more third parties will become aware and we're reaching out to a lot and stuff like that. So maybe in the future this won't be as big a lift as it is now, but I think for the moment, people are nervous to go that. Particularly more complex sites like e-commerce sites, stuff like that, where I think blogs and static sites, you're good to go ahead and do that now if you want to put it on your own blog or that sort of thing.
You've mentioned that you guys are seeing quite a bit more kind of usage here and buy-in. Do you guys have like good telemetry there, or any interesting kind of statistics you can share on like how you found adoption so far?
Based on our telemetry, and you can see this in chromestatus.com, about between 10 and 15, I think it's about 12% of navigations that we see in Chrome are either using or either are pre-rendered or are pre-rendering other pages. Now that's driven a lot by top sites. Google Search is using this. So when you go there, and that's obviously a huge proportion of that, but when you go there, go back to the classic 10 blue links, the top 2 blue links will be prefetched. Now, they do quite a lot of other funky stuff. I have a whole blog post on this because there's a different use case. You're not prefetching something on this site, which most people would do. You're prefetching other site, and there's other privacy implications and that sort of thing. So we actually go via Google servers for those sorts of things, so they don't see your IP address because you haven't visited those sites yet.
Kind of like the email rendering in a proxy kind of
type thing. So we don't do the full pre-render, we just do the prefetch. But anyway, the first 2 are prefetch instantly because most people click on the first or second link. And for the other 8 blue links, we do that hover-based attitude. That hover-based here. So they're obviously a big user. But the other thing that we've got is we've some fairly big platforms. So WordPress has rolled this out to every single WordPress site out there, or at least the ones that are on the latest version of WordPress. We did a lot of work here. There was a WordPress team here that did a lot of work on this. We launched it as a plugin. We got people to use it. We got feedback. We discovered that WooCommerce issue and a few others. We tweaked the rule and so on. And eventually we were confident enough that we got it adopted in WordPress core and last year. And now every WordPress site's using it. Then they're going for that conservative link, click, you start going there. We've now started asking, can we go to the hover-based thing? And the performance team are looking at that. But yeah, even that click gets quite a big increase. They're quite worried as well because a lot of WordPress, it's not a platform in that lots of different people launch it on lower end hardware or they're not in full control and they don't overwhelm those servers and that sort of thing, just with hovering and stuff like that. Shopify is another platform. They've rolled it out to every single Shopify store is using this. So again, in that conservative approach in the beginning, they did a good blog post on it and they've done a couple of podcasts and explaining about it. They discovered all sorts of bugs, so thank you Shopify for fixing that out. Hopefully made it easier for everyone else. But yes, we're seeing 12% or something of navigation, but we're also seeing 12% of websites using this. And those don't normally follow one-to-one because the websites are weighted to all the lower long tail of the web. So we measure all those sorts of things. But getting them on big platforms like WordPress, like Shopify, helps the adoption across the web. Getting it on things like Google search helps the adoption in navigation-based direction. So coincidence that they're both about 12%, but this shows that it's breadth as well as depth. So it is the high-profile sites using it, but it's also the kind of everyone else using it as well.
Nice. Are there any particularly surprising patterns or results? Anything you guys have seen that you weren't expecting but has been interesting to see?
No, I'm struggling to think there. I guess Shopify's one is they showed that kind of 120, 180 millisecond gain. And what was maybe a little surprising and quite pleasing is that they saw it across all percentiles. So it wasn't just like the slower speed people were actually suffering because, I don't know, the prefetching was clashing with their actual page load and the faster people were getting it better and there was a cutoff point. No, it was literally just across the board. They've got 3 graphs for time to first byte, first contentful paint, and large contentful paint, and all of them were just seeing this gain across all percentiles. Etsy also launched it on their search pages, and we can see that their time to first byte was going down to 0 for nearly up to 50th percentile. I think it was like 45th percentile. So like nearly half of their pages are getting a 0 TTFB, which is that can be a big blocker for getting a nice LCP, which is when your main content is loaded there. So getting that down to 0 kind of really shows the gain there because they went with a hover-based scenario and they're pushing out more from that. Nothing too surprising, but more pleasing yes, this is really working.
Do you think that those improvements to those metrics, that then the search engines like the Lighthouse scores, things that are factored into that, do you think that'll drive quite a bit of adoption here? People trying to get those numbers down?
Yeah, the only difference is you can't really see this in Lighthouse because Lighthouse typically does a single page load. Yeah. Whereas this is for the next page load. So there is a mode that you can turn on Lighthouse where you can load 2 pages, but few enough people use that. So yeah, if your Lighthouse score isn't going to go up just by using this, but it's more in your sort of field data, so your Crux data, your Chrome user experience data, or if you've got any RUM data yourself, that you'll see this going up there.
And again, it's probably tricky to speak to. Search engines starting to factor in the multi-page user browsing experience and using that to weigh rankings and all that stuff.
Yeah, so for the Core Web Vitals initiative, we use the Crux, the Chrome User Experience Report data, which does look at all page loads across your session rather than just a Lighthouse text. So it will be included in that. I don't work on the search side of that, so I can't explain how much of the difference that is, but certainly...
Pull the numbers down, yeah. Especially if you're like getting those results like Etsy was seeing, where there's a subset of pages that are just 0 time to first byte and stuff like that.
Yeah, and even without any search engine ranking, there has been a proven correlation between web performance speed and business metrics. More people spending time on the page and stuff like that. You know yourself, if you're clicking around something and it's slow, it gets annoying. Whereas, this is quite nippy, this is quite fun to use. I'll look around these other things and do it rather than I'll just try and do the bare minimum and get off this site.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess the pursuit of making that easier for developers to do without kind of getting themselves in trouble is always a win. Moving forward, is there anything you're thinking about? Any specific directions you guys are considering pursuing on what this API might look like, future changes?
So as I say, the pre-render until script we're very excited about. So that is going into dev trial. So if listeners want to try that out or give us feedback and say, hey, this works fantastic, hurry up and release it. Or no, it doesn't work on this particular site for whatever reasons, then do let us know. You can raise bugs at crbug.com and feedback. So that's definitely the biggest sort of near-term one in the next quarter or two that we're interested in that. I'm personally excited about seeing adoption across other browsers. I alluded to it earlier. We've got the basics in there in Safari and behind the flag. But anyway, so we'll see. We'll go there. We've got Firefox interested. It's also weird in the web platform when you're sitting there and you work for one browser, but you're rooting for the web. So you're rooting for the other browsers to do it because it makes my job easier to sell this API and say, use it. Because one of the first questions is, does it work in other browsers or do I need to do it? Now, in this case, it's a progressive enhancement, so it's not going to break anything by other browsers not supporting it, but it's always nice to actually say, yes, you will also see improvements on, particularly in mobile. There's a lot of iOS users out there that will use Safari's engine. So I think those two things are the kind of exciting things. This mobile viewport heuristic thing is fairly recently launched, so I don't think we've got full feedback there, so I'm interested to hear about that. And then after that, as I say, we're speaking to a lot of partners and trying to get more rolled out, or a lot of third parties, and trying to make them all pre-render aware. So it's a hard slog there. But those are the main things we're going to be working on for the next few months and next couple of quarters, is to try and get those things kind of locked down.
Are you ever lamenting that like none of this was considered in the more initial stages, like the protocol, the specs here on how navigation works, where now developers need to be in like an opt-in mode to get this kind of behavior? Or do you think that eventually it'll become so ubiquitous that this is just how the web feels?
I think, yeah, I'm not lamenting that it wasn't there in the past. I think when the web first took off, I'm old enough to remember the days of dial-up modems and slow speed and that sort of thing. This sort of thing really would have killed things. And in some ways, it would have been easier back then because there was a lot of read-only documents and not apps and stuff like that. But it didn't have the bandwidth, literally, back then. I think it has become ubiquitous for JavaScript frameworks. It just happens and stuff like that. I'd love to become more. I mean, 12% is quite a lot already, and I can only see that growing over the next while. So I think it'll become pretty ubiquitous, even on the web platform and stuff like that. I don't know if we'll ever get to the point where we can just pre-render by default, and if, say, like I say, the browser does it in certain things with bookmark bars and that sort of thing, but in very limited scenarios, I think there is still things where it's going to break things or log out links or add to basket links, stuff like that. So I think it's still going to have to be opt-in, but I think, like you said earlier, hovering over things is fairly safe and you can be fairly sure that it does that. And what I really like is it's built into the browser, so you don't need to have a third-party logout library that you have to pull in, or you've got this extension installed, you get it, but your neighbor doesn't. We've moved it from you tweaking your browser to do this to site owners tweaking their site to do this for you, which is, I think, a good step now that people get it by default, and at the same time without kilobytes and more JavaScript to do that. And some of the people who've written these libraries are fantastic, and they've paved the way for all this sort of stuff. But I always like when everything's become default in the browser rather than extra things that you have to add.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree. I'm sure it's closer now than something else. I'm always just thinking of my utility websites in the area and stuff like that, where they're like doing the minimum to make everything keep functioning. And so I'm always just like, what is the path that's going to get it so my local power company website gets the performance gains that I'm seeing elsewhere on the web? So I think this seems like a better place than them needing to rely on some library or something.
And the fact that platforms like WordPress and Shopify are adopting it, so even if your local power company doesn't have web developers to do it and they're just using a Shopify theme or whatever, then they'll get it anyway because they're looking at it. Or if it's a WordPress blog, then they're going to get it anyway.
Cool. Yeah, I'll keep an ay out, and hopefully it'll be a thing that just becomes so normal that you really feel it when you hit a page that is not doing it. Oh, I've got to wait for a real load now. Dang it. Yeah, cool. Thank you so much for your time, Barry. It's been a pleasure. It's always nice chatting to people who are passionate about a specific tech and have something rolling out that they're excited about. So thank you for coming on.
Cool. And if people want to reach out and we've got any questions, and I'm pretty active in socials, they can find me at Tune the Web and most of them, whatever, and I'm happy to answer any questions about this.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll have a link in the show notes. Thanks again. Take it easy.
Cheers.